again, let me disclose that Duchess and I know each other from the University of Pennsylvania, and you guys who are out there know how I feel about the school. I give it a plug every single time. I'm speaking with someone that has graduated from the school, proud alum, and it is what it is, right? But I think you and I were 2 years apart back then, and I just remember, and I think we talked about this during the pre-interview. I had heard a lot about you, but I didn't necessarily know what you were up to. I would always hear threads of things, right? Duchess is doing this, or Duchess is doing that, et cetera, et cetera. And likewise, as I started on my journey and I, moved to Washington, D.C., and then New Orleans for law school and business school, I still would hear little things about what you were up to. So I'm not totally unfamiliar with your career and your choices and so on. But if you could tell everybody else, what you have become, what you've been up to.
Sure. I mean, well, if we start with Penn, when I was in my first year at Penn, there was a Black student named Quintus Jett. And I think Quintus was in your class. I think he was 89. And I was 91. And Quintus was on the undergraduate assembly, which was the mainstream student government. And the way that was set up is that they had arts and science representatives, a nursing representative, Wharton representatives, and then engineering. Quintus was in engineering, and he ran for a spot in student government and got on as a Black guy, which for, people my kids' generation, they've seen Black United States as a president, Black vice president of the United States, right? It's like, oh, what would be the big deal of student government? This was 87. This was huge. And so after Quintus won, he went around to all the dorms, right? And sometimes I feel like I have to talk to young people that we didn't have email chains back then. You didn't have that in 87. And we didn't have cell phones. You call people on their dorm phone. So instead of doing all that, what was easiest was just door knocking. So he just went around and found Black people and said, do you want to run for student government? And I'm a big extrovert, I like things like that. It sounded interesting. I was like, I'll run. And so I got out there and I ran, and it changed me because it exposed me to all different kinds of Penn students. And so my class had 2,500 students in it, which at the time was one of the biggest entering classes. And so all the varying kind of interests and constituencies ended up in student government. And it also exposed me to some hostilities that I kind of had underestimated. I didn't realize that there would be people who might be resentful that someone like me was on student government. And so long story short, spring semester of my junior year, I ran for the chair, which is student body president. And I actually won. It was a big to do because at first I think it was a tie, and then we had the runoff, and then I eventually squeezed it out, and it ended up being a big thing. I didn't realize it at the time. I was the first Black woman to head up a student government in an Ivy League. And so this was spring of 90. And Penn at this time, as you know, because we were there together, had racial strife that was making the A section of the New York Times. That's the level of racial strife. And so when I ended up becoming visible like that, and also because you're young, you don't really realize what the visibility will be. For me, this was my club. This was my extracurricular. I just had the passion. I ended up getting death threats. And I actually was offered a walking guard.
Are you serious?
This is the first time I'm talking about this publicly. So I'm like, okay, I was invited on David P. France. I'll tell my story now. Right? I was offered a walking guard.
By whom? By the university?
Yes, by the vice provost of University Life.
who was
Yes.
Dr. Kate
Valerie
at the time.
Swain Cade McCullum, who is still there, who is still a dear friend of mine.